good, Samuel.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming out. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day. We are going to record, so we'll have this available for anybody else that couldn't make it. It had to be the one day that it's 70 degrees and beautiful outside, so we take what we got. But tonight, this isn't about a particular TIF. It isn't about one that's already out there. These gentlemen have nothing to do with any of the TIFs we have. They're here basically just to educate us, give us some information, and at the end of this night, they're going to answer some questions. So tonight we have Alex Olson, Pete Olson, and Jack Woods. I'm going to turn it over to Alex right now.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, I just want to say thanks for you guys coming here. Just really quick, just so we can understand it a little bit more. How many people have some sort of interaction with TIF? I've heard about it, seen it in the newspaper, seen it online. Okay. So pretty good show of hands. There's some people who don't know, and that's great as well. And then how many people are on some sort of board in the county, elected official, on a school board, RDC, something? Okay. So we've got a good group of folks that are involved, and whether you're on board now or have plans to be on one in the future, this is a great conversation to have and just a great subject to understand. Again, my name is Alex Olson. I do client development and client relations with the Veritas group, and what that really means is I get to go out and have conversations with elected officials and town folks that are working on projects, and get to share more about what we do. So very similar to what we're doing here. One of our mission is really to develop great communities with local leaders. So it's great to be here and just living out that mission. Perfect. And then I have Jack Woods and Pete Olson, who Commissioner Bischoff got to do a quick intro, and I'll let them, talk about their background and just introduce themselves when they come up here in a few minutes. But to talk a little bit more about Civitas strategies, really, it's our economic development arm of the Veritas group, really focused on that practical, actionable strategies that move projects forward. We like to really understand the community and implement and amplify what the community needs are and what the community voice is based on data, based on stakeholder engagement. So very similar to this, getting in a room, getting to look people in the eyes and understand, questions they may have, concerns they may have, hopes and dreams they may have for a project or their community. Yeah. So the other thing I'll just add, which I think makes this conversation really fun tonight, is that our first project was here in Dearborn County. It was a Lawrence Bird Hotel and Event Center as the Veritas as a whole. So Tim, our owner and founder in 2011, started on that project. So we have some really special significance to Dearborn County. So it's always great to get back down here and get to meet more citizens. So just for tonight, we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about really TIF, just covering some basics, just so you guys know, we aren't financial advisors, we're not attorneys. So this is really our economic development professional practitioner opinions and understandings. But again, the way that, I don't know if anybody in here is an attorney, but I'm not gonna say I know more than an attorney in a public meeting. So some of the things we're going to just be covering here is local government funding. We're going to cover tax increment financing, or TIF. We're going to talk a little bit about TIF districts, why they're established, how they're used, some of those things, and we're also going to talk a little bit about development agreements as well. So get a chance to see some of those, get a chance to look at some scenarios, and then give you all a chance to ask some questions, and then we'll have a survey at the end that you guys are. So that's all from me right now. I'll turn it over to people.
So good evening. My name is Pete
Olson. I am the Director of Community Development for Civitas Strategies. I've been with the company now for about 4 years. Prior to that, I spent 25 years in municipal government as either a town manager or city manager. So this first part of the night, I'm going to give you just a little bit of education, not necessarily an education. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how governments have been funded traditionally in Indiana, some of the changes that we're starting to see, how that's affecting things moving forward and everything else. So first and foremost, right, we three things in life, or two things in life we can't avoid: death and taxes. So schools, municipalities, counties, they all have to pay taxes to fund things for public safety, for economic development, for doing parks and recreation, depending on which local government is in place, paying teachers, making sure that we have good quality of life from that point forward. So when we start talking about how local governments are funded in the state of Indiana, traditionally those have been through property taxes for the last number of years. As a town manager, every year we were worried about something called assessed value, and you all as taxpayers are aware of what your assessed value are, because every time you go to pay your property taxes in May and November, those bills have been figured off of your assessed value of your home. Same thing goes for a commercial business. The same thing goes for rental businesses. Although in 2011, the state actually, 2010, we as voters went and we passed property tax caps that had an effect. And so as a homeowner, we were always capped at a 1% limit. If you were a commercial business, you were at a 2% business, and then if you were a landlord, you were at a 3% limit. What that basically means, so let's just do some easy math. If you have a house that's $200,000, and you're the property owner that living in that house, the maximum that you could end up paying would be a $1,000 or a $2,000 bill. 1% of $200,000 would be that $2,000 bill. If you're a commercial business and you're at say $1 million business property tax, you would then have the ability that would double, so you would then be at maxing out at $40,000 if I'm doing my math right. And then if you're a landlord, you step that up to the third. But that is shared across all levels of government. So one of the things to think about is if we're talking about Aurora, or we're talking about Lawrenceburg, or we're talking about Dearborn County, we're talking about South Dearborn schools or Lawrence schools, your libraries, they're going to take that maximum tax levy that they're able to capture each year, they're going to divide that up. And so if you're paying that $2,000 on a $200,000 house, that means that part of that is probably going to go to the county, and it's going to fund sheriffs, it's going to fund the assessor's office, then it's going to go to the town or the city, and it's going to fund, zoning, it's going to fund police officers, fire departments, and then it's going to come to the school, it's going to pay for teachers, it's going to pay for building upgrades, and everything else. Now, a little of that changed also in 2010. There's some numbers to follow students. We'll get into that here in a couple of seconds. But this last year, actually 2 years ago, things really started to change. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this other than to tell you that Senate Ruled Act 1, which happened in 2024, if I'm doing my math right, 2025, has now changed that. And we wanted what Governor and the legislators basically have started to talk about is they want to change how we're funding local governments, and what that's going to do is that's going to lock in some homesteads and give you a reduction at the property tax level, but that means that we're also going to be looking at other options for funding streams. And this change is going to start taking place over the next few years. In 2029, there will be the opportunity by the local governments, that includes the county, the cities, depending on size restrictions, to go ahead and implement an income tax to help offset cost reductions associated with property taxes. And that will have effects that's both upstream and downstream. Throughout the state, we'll see many communities that will start to make decisions about implementing those income taxes. Some will say, no, we don't want to do that. And that means we're going to have to start looking at cutting services. Maybe we're going to reduce the number of fire trucks that we buy in a year, or the number of police cars that we buy in a year. Maybe we're not going to mow as often at a park. All of those could have an effect. Or you can start looking at a place of saying, how do we continue to grow some assessed value? Because when we start talking about commercial assessed values and rental assessed values, those numbers are not locked in the SEA 1 the same way that the property taxes are. So, part of the reason we're here tonight is to talk a little bit about economic development funding. What has happened, and I want to be very clear about this. TIF is a function of economic development funding throughout the state of Indiana. It's one of the last tools that are left. And I'm a proponent of TIF. I don't want to say that I'm not, but it has to be in the right situation. And so there are different taxes, different property taxes, income taxes, and everything else. But TIF, when utilized in economic development projects, is normally utilized so that we can move forward with funding some gaps, or to help with infrastructure, or to help other projects. TIF is only an increment funding mechanism. It does not give you the power to utilize economic domain. It does not give away people's properties. And we'll get into a but for here in a few minutes. But TIF is the tax increment funding. So it is a tax, it's an increment funding that goes from there. There are some other projects or other ways of funding economic development throughout the state. You see the READY program, and many of you have probably heard about the READY program. You could look at what those projects have done over the years, whether it's helping in creating mixed-use buildings or paying for water and sewer extensions. I happen to be a neighbor. I work with the City of Rising Sun. They actually are using READY dollars to help do an electrical expansion that will allow additional housing to be built between Aurora and the City of Rising Sun. So that READY program was started by Governor Holcomb and is extended now, and we're actually in what is called READY 2. There are other programs like the low-income housing tax credits that are income-based housing that's used for there. HUD, the Department of Urban Housing, has various funds that can be used for economic development. But a lot of these are all required you're going to land in a particular category, whereas TIF is the local one that is controlled here by the Redevelopment Commission and County Council, or Town Council, City Council, etc., and has the opportunity to go. The other option that obviously exists out there for economic development would be if you have large amounts of cash on hand, which most local governments do not. But if they do have large cash amounts on hand, they're able to help pay for some of those improvements as well. I did want to say, if you have questions, not that anybody's gotten there, hopefully we answer them through this, but we've got plenty of time for questions at the end. So please make notes of any questions that you have. We can always come back and talk about that. So, TIF, and I talked about it here just a couple of seconds ago. Tax increment financing. Tax is property tax. It takes the assessed value of a project, and it's going to build that number over time. And then that new tax revenue can be used for a number of things. So I just mentioned infrastructure. Well, that's water, that's sewer, that may be streets, that may be getting electric to a site. It goes to site development. In particular, that means that maybe you've got a hilly site that needs to be leveled out, and you've got to have some engineering to level that out and go from there. Other public improvements. So we've actually seen TIF used to build parks, to build other common areas that will help improve the quality of life that goes on there. And then once it's all said and done, that existing tax revenue that's going to roll off will ultimately go to all of those taxing districts that I was talking about. Again, that could be the county, that could be the city, that could be a town, that could be a library, that could be an airport. All of those exist. Solid waste district is another. So just to think about TIF here for a couple of seconds. Right now, you have just what is called base AV. You may have a piece of property, if it is just a green field that is maybe existing farmland or a pasture. Maybe that piece of property has a base value of $1,000 per acre, and you've got 10 acres of $10,000. Without TIF, and it's the but-for test, and I'll talk about it again here in a couple seconds, but without TIF, maybe a developer that wants to come in and build a $30 million mixed-use building isn't able to do some improvements. And what that developer wants to do is they want to take the increased assessed value, which is going to lead more to more property tax rolling off of that, and they want to use that. So they may issue a bond to help pay for those road improvements, that sidewalk, that park, anything that would help attract additional people in there to justify that project. And what we find a lot is that between the cost of building right now, the cost of due to inflationary costs that have really come out of COVID, the cost of interest, because we're seeing elevated interest costs again, when we were all getting home loans at 3%, and now you can't get one for less than 6%. That insurance cost has caused things to go up. So ultimately what's happening is that our developer, in general, is normally asking that we capture that TIF amount for somewhere between 20 and 25 years, which is allowed by state law. And then they'll use that money over years to pay off that bond. And so what you see is you've got this base value that is there, and it starts here, and if you go for up to 25 years, this base value, if it was again, that $1,000 per acre for 10 acres, whatever the tax that's going to come off of that would ultimately roll still over those 25 years. Would continue to roll to the school, would continue to roll to the city, to the town, to the library district. So if out of that $1,000, the county was getting $333, the school was getting $300, and the town was getting $300, and then the airport was getting $30, and the library was getting $30. Over the next 25 years, they're going to continue to get that same amount. That doesn't change. It's just going to be like that empty field is still there, and they're going to continue to roll that off. And there's a couple of ways that can change, but that's what ultimately happens. But at the end of this 25 years, there's a new project AD that's out there. So let's say that developer builds that development for $30 million, but at the end of 25 years, it's now worth $100 million. And they're able then to take that $100 million will then go on to the assessed value of all of those districts, and that'll increase. And that's the reason it's attractive, is because at the very base, it acts like nothing has happened. Again, the school gets to continue to capture the money that they were there. If it was a blank piece of property, the town gets to cover it. But at the end of this, at the end of that 25 years, if we've gone for that maximum amount of bond, we're going to capture this new amount. And that's going to help drive everybody's property taxes down, or that is at least the goal of it. The other thing, and I was talking about mixed-use buildings, so let's talk a little bit about schools here for the last couple of seconds. One of the things that we again saw back in the early 2010s was that there was an allocation that now follows the student. And that means that for every student that a school enrolls, if you enroll 5 more, they get that additional amount of money. So my wife happens to teach at Yorktown High School, or Yorktown Middle School, and for every student that they bring in, they get an extra $6,000 roughly, and my number may be off. It's been a couple years since I've done the math. But they get an extra $6,000. So for every student that comes in, the school gets an extra $6,000 that goes to help pay for teachers, to help pay for custodians, to operate the school. And that's beneficial. When you start to think about, we're going to talk about housing tips here in a couple of seconds. If we can start, not only are we increasing the assessed value 25 years down the road, but we're also talking about adding more students to to the schools. That helps both the schools, and it helps it keep the school system rolling. It also helps the assessed value in the long run for the town and the city and everything else. So, what do we use this money for? And here are just some examples. I don't want to just read them. Kind of talk about them. Again, it's that infrastructure cost. It's maybe buying the land. Maybe it's even helping the developer build a little bit of that building if there's public use space, etc. All of those dollars can be utilized for that. Again, I want to emphasize, because we get a lot of bad raps in the state of Indiana on the economic development side. Well, all you're doing is taking people's property. That's not the case. TIF doesn't allow that. TIF is a tool to finance projects. It is not the use of eminent domain. It is not the use of making decisions. Those are policy decisions that exist, and those are left up to your local officials, but that is not what TIF does. So at no point when we're talking about TIF does that mean somebody's automatically losing their land. In fact, 90% of the projects that happen throughout the state actually happen between willing partners, somebody willing to give up their farmland, understanding what's there. And that's not to say that there aren't controversial projects out there. Those are decisions, again, that have to be left up to your individual policymakers, whether that's your county commissioners, your city council members, whatever else. The redevelopment commission will be involved in all that. There is a process that goes through and makes that happen. So, just from a very high level, and I'm not an attorney, I know there's one in the room, and I don't need him getting me any trouble later in the day. Maybe I'll turn and look at him, sorry. The redevelopment commission, to create a TIF, the redevelopment commission is involved, the planning commission is involved, and then your legislative body, so whether that's your county council or your city council, is going to be involved in those situations. So basically what has to happen is that your redevelopment commission has to understand that without a tax increment economic development agreement or economic development area, that a project may not get done. They'll create the TIF area. There's a number of resolutions, public hearings that have to happen. So anytime the TIF is going to happen throughout the community, there's going to be a number of public hearings, whether that's at the redevelopment commission level, that's at the planning commission level, or that's at the council level. Those are going to happen. If the RDC decides that they want to create that TIF, then it will ultimately move to the planning commission. The planning commission has to concur and send that to the legislative body. The legislative body will then have to enact an ordinance that says, yes, we believe that this project is worthwhile in our community. We're going to move that forward, and it'll then go back to the redevelopment commission and establish that economic development area. The redevelopment commission then has some options looking at how they're going to help fund projects. They may have been asked by the developer to create the CEA so that they can do sidewalk improvements or do infrastructure improvements. They'll then do that. They'll also get the economic development commission involved, who will actually issue the bonds. So there's a number of public units that are going to be involved anyway there. So I apologize, that took a little longer on that than I intended. So the first tip is the traditional one, the one that we talk about the most. This has been used for industrial projects throughout the state for years. A lot of times when we talk about recruiting, it used to be when we were talking about recruiting the next Honda plant. So if we talk about Greensburg and they used the Honda plant, they created a TIF area up in that particular area. That was then used to help build roads out to that plant. It was helped to run infrastructure out to that plant. It's a commercial use. It's going to pay that 2%. Again, if we go back to that 1 or 2 or 3%, it's going to pay 2%, the maximum property tax levy, and that will then go into the TIF area. That can be helped use pay bonds and everything else. Multifamily or mixed-use buildings, again, fall under this. This is just one of the normal tools that is often used. I will tell you, when I was in Yorktown, we had built up our downtown area, and then we started negotiating with the developer. This was pre-COVID, so I'm afraid to tell you the numbers for a building that cost $6 million, it would now cost you about $18 million to do. They came in and they requested a $2 million TIF to help with site improvement, to help with public infrastructure and everything else. And the redevelopment commission had to make the decision that that was a worthwhile cause. And when we do it, Jack will talk here in a couple of seconds how we deal with developers, but it's very open, transparent process. They'll show us the number that they expect to get off of rental incomes and mixed use, and then we have to make the decision whether or not that was the appropriate use for those dollars. Single family TIFs are a little bit, they're not new, but they're a recent redevelopment of the state. So when I moved the state of Indiana back in 2006 and was in Union City as their city manager, it was legal to have housing TIFs. And somewhere around 2008, 2009, they actually took housing TIFs away from the local governments and said, we no longer want this to do it, although if you had one that was established, you need to continue to pay on that TIF. That happened. Somewhere in 21 or 22, just knowing that we have a loss, or not a loss, we don't have enough housing to really keep up. We've seen that housing construction is not keeping up with the demand. Therefore, what we're seeing is housing costs expand. We don't have the ability for young people to find housing. We maybe have people like myself who don't have kids, and we no longer want to stay in a single-family home. We're looking for something that's more efficient, or we want to move into a townhome, which then would open up opportunities for single-family homes. Those projects just weren't getting done. And again, coming out of COVID, that inflationary cost, it was going up. In addition to interest costs going up, the state stepped in, the state legislature stepped in and said, hey, we're willing to look at housing TIFs. They set some regulations in the first years of that, and the second year of that, they actually removed all those restrictions. It's now legal to do it anywhere in the state of Indiana, and a number of communities have started to look at that as a way to help. And a lot of times when we talk about the housing TIFs, that really is going to extend infrastructure or roads and those types of projects, if you will. And then just some of the benefits of housing TIF. Again, as I told you, for the right project, in my opinion, it is a good tool. Every project needs to be weighed at the local level. Every project needs to be evaluated on whether it's going to happen or not. But additional housing stock is obviously something that could be a benefit out of it. We do, Jack and I, and the rest of our team do a number of housing studies throughout the state. We can tell you that every community and every county that we've done a housing study in has told us that we don't have enough houses, and anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 houses per year need to be built. And we're not keeping up with that demand in those counties. I said that right? Pretty close. He's the data guy. But anyways, those numbers are one way of doing it. Other infrastructure, so once you build infrastructure, you think about taking infrastructure maybe from, say we were at this school and we were taking it a mile up the road so that we could have an industrial site as an opportunity for the use of TIF. That infrastructure would not only serve that industrial site, but it could also be another opportunity to get more homes or other businesses along the way. And so anytime you put infrastructure, that's an increased availability. The addition of jobs are still important, especially if we're going to start talking about income tax as a possibility over the next couple of years. Again, that's a policy choice. I'm not advocating that the county do that. I just know it's a tool that will more than likely be looked at in the 2029 area. But having additional jobs and additional income is always good. Plus, you always want to make sure that you're providing good wages for your locals. And then you have this increased AV, because just because we cap the homeowner property tax, you still have that opportunity for additional AV that goes along there. And then for schools, we talked about it a little bit. This is one that often gets a little bit questionable. A lot of schools will be like, well, yeah, but we're losing out on the additional value to start with, which is true. The real hope is that we're going to see additional come in, if you're doing something like a housing TIF, you could also see that there is an opportunity to do a pass-through. So let's go back and talk about if we had that $30 million project that runs to $100 million over that 20-25-year timeline. Every redevelopment commission every year in May has to make a decision whether or not they're going to allow TIF pass-through to go on. So if at some point you were covering the cost of that bond, you don't have another project that's upcoming, so you're not trying to recruit another business, or you maybe don't see an opportunity for another mixed-use building or a park project that increases quality of life to recruit additional people. What the redevelopment commission can do in that time is they can say, we're going to pass this money through that is not needed, and we're going to utilize that. And it will then, if that base assessed valuation will actually go up, those numbers will actually then go to the school, they'll go to the library, they'll go to the city, they'll go to the town. And then this last one is one that's kind of it's gaining traction across the state. How do we use TIF dollars in continuing education? How do we make sure that we're educating a workforce that is going to be able to perform the jobs that we're recruiting for? So two projects that I'll talk about specifically would be made in Plainfield, which sits right next to their high school, but it's actually a campus that Amazon, Indiana State, Vincennes, all have people there. They're using robots every day. They're teaching people who are going to work in the warehouses right next to the airport. Excuse me. They're learning what technology can be used. You know, people need training. A lot of those companies have partnerships with MAID and are able to send their people back. They're able to get the training right there. It's a great one. The other one that I'll talk about is Amplify Hancock. This is a partnership between the county, the local communities, and the local schools in Hancock County. Very similar to MAID. They're setting up a very similar project where they're going to have training. Again, high school students will have the ability, some will be able to go in, they're going to have a welding program in there. They're going to have robot technology because there's a number of warehouses that are going into that area. Both of those projects have been funded by TIF throughout those areas. They're not actually in the TIF areas. Actually, the Amplify one is in the TIF area, but the warehouses that are paying for both of those projects are taxed, whereas those schools are being funded, the construction of those schools are being funded, and then the schools are partnering with them. So my last screen is going to be the but-for test. So a lot of people want to go back to people will be like, yeah, but if we're going to get this development, then why do we have to have TIF? Or why should we talk about it? And one of the discussions that is this but-for. And for every TIF project to happen, what you have to have is this but-for test. This project would not occur but for the use of an incentive. So, if I'm the developer, and I'm not a developer, but if I'm a developer and I come to you and I say, I'm willing to build this $6 million project, but my rents for those mixed-use spaces, for those residential spaces, are only going to spin off, if I have a $2 million, or I have a $6 million bond, but that's only going to spin off enough to pay a $4 million bond, I can't do this project. That's when the local community has to make that decision of whether or not this project is worthwhile. Am I going to gain additional quality of life? Am I going to gain additional students? Am I going to be able to move forward with this project, and does it make sense? And again, those are local policy decisions. They have to be the right project. I would not encourage anybody to put a smelting plant in the middle of a downtown and use TIF work, right? There's an evaluation that goes on. But if you have an industrial site that is outside of town, near an airport, or near a port of some kind, you may be like, yeah, it makes sense. On the same hand, if you have mixed use and you're saying, I need more residential places for people to move, because I want to attract people that are straight out of college, or I want to attract people that maybe want to move out of single-family homes so that they can move into this, and somebody else can move into a single-family home, and that they'll bring 3 or 4 children that are going to go to our school. Those are opportunities that have to be evaluated. So again, this project will not happen but for the use of some type of incentive that makes sense. I'm going to turn it over to Chad. Let him talk a little bit through a couple of scenarios that he deals with when he's talking to developers.
Thanks, Pete. My name is Jack Woods. I'm the Director of Economic Development at the Civitas Strategies. I get the opportunity to work with cities, towns, and counties on a daily basis, advising them on development projects. So essentially serving as an advocate for communities, help them understand the benefits and trade-offs of projects, of growth, of development. And a lot of times that boils down to how incentives actually work. Pete did a really good job about explaining the functions of TIF, and I would say it is the most powerful incentive that counties have to do economic development projects, but it's not something that you should use for every project. I think Pete touched on that just a second ago. You should probably take a more surgical approach to incentives, especially TIF, instead of a blanket approach. And we face that with communities that we partner with all the time. I don't want to name names to call out any communities, but there's a few that we've worked with that most of the development that they've seen over the last 10, 15, 20 years has been lower paying industrial wages or warehousing and logistics. And they ask us, hey, why are these the only projects that we can seem to get into our county? And the answer is because, well, you're only incentivizing those projects, right? If you give tax abatement or TIF to every project that's paying $15 an hour in wages, that's probably all you're going to get. So it's a really good opportunity, going back to Pete's earlier point, to incentivize high-quality projects that would not otherwise happen without that incentive. And oftentimes that's because costs of infrastructure or the revenue from the project is not going to be able to pay off financing or cash flow completely. So that's where the public-private partnership comes into place. And again, that's kind of where our team helps play a role with economic development corporations, cities, towns, and counties, and advising them what type of deal makes the most sense, not necessarily just for a developer, but for the public entity. And ultimately, that's predominantly a function of the redevelopment commission and something that needs to be weighed at that level. Again, it's very much a policy decision. So I like to use the phrase that development is probably going to happen to you, and you shouldn't let that development happen to you. You need to make the development you want to see happen. So what that means is it really boils back down to having an updated comprehensive plan, right? That kind of sets the vision for what growth and development looks like, and that's unique to every community across the state. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. That may mean focusing on preservation of farmland and really coordinating development in urban areas. I think that's important. And other communities want to, put fewer guardrails on growth where that occurs. But all that to say, right, you need to have those policy decisions in place on what type of projects you're going to incentivize. And then from there, I think that gives us some good framework on how these negotiations move forward and what you're willing to provide TIF or incentives for. I think what that then boils down to is a couple ways that this can play out. Oftentimes, I think communities or leaders think this is a one-size-fits-all approach, and you have to give 100% of that increased tax increment to the project to help pay off the bonds like Pete talked about. That's pretty common in what we see and what a lot of developers will ask for. It does still incentivize and give you the benefit of a lot of higher quality projects. And I can't say I wouldn't recommend that approach if you get the perfect project that really fits what you want to see in the community, if that's something that's going to pay higher wages, bring higher quality jobs, address a housing need that you have in the county or communities within the county. There are trade-offs though, because you're not seeing that property tax revenue come back to the community for usually about 25 years. Again, pros to that one, but something else that I think you are in a position to do as a community is negotiate what that split looks like from a TIF standpoint.
Some developers will tell you that they need 100% of TIF, but that might not be the case. And I would recommend that you ask to see pro formas and the financials to every project so you can evaluate whether the level of incentive that they're asking for is actually the level of incentive that's needed. And when it's not, there's an opportunity to split that increment, that TIF between the community and the developer. Oftentimes we'll see that as a 90-10% split, or an 80-20% split, where 90 or 80% of the increment will go to the development project, and then that 10 or 20% will go back to the community, whether that's cities, towns, or counties. So it's not the full increment, but it's still more money, again, going back to that before tax and revenue from the public entity to pay for projects outside of these developments, whether that goes back to the schools, goes to police or fire, or other services. And it really boils down to creating that public-private partnership. I want to emphasize the word partnership because I think that's what these deals need to be. It needs to be a partnership with the community and the developer. And it shouldn't be a one-sided approach because ultimately that won't work, and it'll leave a bad taste in your mouth as a community, and probably leave a bad taste in the developer's mouth when there's pushback and nobody wants them to come back and do the next project. So I think however you approach these deals, we're using this incentive. Partnership needs to be the first thing in mind, and it needs to bring benefits to both sides. So again, we'll save time for questions at the end. I think that was a pretty quick overview of how this should work on the community end. I'm going to turn it back over to Alex, and he wanted to highlight some projects that we're seeing across the state that do a good job promoting those partnerships and have been an effective use of tax incentives, especially good.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So, Jack, would you just go back and this slide real quick? One thing I do want to pay attention to, and this may be something that those that are familiar, that are interacting with TIF have seen, maybe they haven't, but one of the things that's really important to understand TIF and where it's been incredibly successful around the state, I don't want to say the C word, but Carmel, is that no property taxes is maybe seen during the TIF period, but that is a 25-year term. And so the way that Carmel, when you think of Carmel, Indiana, where they were able to really leverage that strategically is that at the end of that, of some of their initial planning, they're now seeing that increased AV because of some of the investments. So, I mean, it's like planning something, right? You don't see the benefits in day one. You don't see it in day two. There's a 70-day gestational growth germination period or what have you. You don't get to harvest the fruit until the end of that. And so what you see with TIF is exactly that. You have 25 years of this growth, but at the end of that AV is going to be increased by whatever that exponential amount was. So just wanted to say that as it relates. So we have three different kind of stories that have recently happened in the news, and then I also want to just have everybody, think for a second, go through a little bit of a thought activity. So this article from March 4th of this year. So there's plenty of news articles out right now if you want to look into this, but Microsoft is developing a data center. There's a lot of data centers being developed in northern Indiana, kind of the whole spread from northwest Indiana over to northeast Indiana. And in this new deal, Microsoft is going to develop this data center. They actually went back. The county actually went back after the initial terms were created and worked out a new deal with Microsoft that's going to be putting $15 million to the schools each year. So part of this agreement over the next 25 years of this TIF, the school's going to receive $15 million each year based on the investment that Microsoft is having in the county. Obviously, that was money initially that what the school wasn't going to get to necessarily be directly, they were going to directly benefit them, but that was one of the terms of the agreement. And so to this and to the other ones that we're going to share, and going off of what Jack said, it needs to be something that makes sense for your community, but these are also some of the things that people are asking for around the state that obviously $15 million to a school can have a huge influence in teacher salaries. That can help, get the best and brightest teachers that you have. It can help with burnout, retention, all those things. It can help fund programs, fund education, fund clubs, all of those things. So just wanted to highlight that on this one, and then going over to the next one. This is another interesting one. It's less on the school side, but Google is doing a project in Fort Wayne, and part of their incentive is to actually use some of their money to skill, to hire and train skilled workers to do some of the jobs, so taking local residents, being able to train free of charge, and then have obviously higher credentials to have high-paying jobs. And then the third one that we have here is going to be just an example of, this is INM is Indiana Michigan Power, so they're an energy company, and with the use of some of the energy that's happening again up north, they're actually issuing all users a tax credit, or a user credit per month. So they're going to be seeing reductions in about it says, I think later down, that it's about $7 a month. But if you think about the impact of that over the whole community in monthly, that's extra money, that's extra gas money, that's extra, and we need that right now. I need that extra gas money for real. So just, it's a small thing, but over a year, over 25 years, obviously that's going to add up. So that's one of the things they're doing there. We were actually talking, we didn't put any examples of projects that didn't happen on here. And I think a great example of that is if you, for those that are familiar or saw that there was a big data center that was going to be going into potentially right next to Tuttle's. We have a Tuttle's membership, which is Tuttle's is an apple farm in Hancock County, and it's great. There's a lot of hay rides, pumpkin patch, some different things. It's a great agritourism site, if you will, in Hancock County, which is to the east of Marion County in Indianapolis. And the proposed data center is going to be like right next to it. And when you're at the pumpkin patch, I don't think many people think about looking over and just seeing some giant industrial building right next to them. So it was one of those things that the community came together, and that was a project that didn't make sense for the area, right? There's other areas. There is some industrial closer to the highway, but the proximity to Tuttle's, it just didn't make sense for the site. So I didn't put that in because it necessarily wasn't applicable to the benefit, but there's clearly benefit in that for the quality of place that you're going to experience when your family's at the apple farm. I think the last thing we've got a survey up here, and we're going to take questions. But before we get to that, I just really wanted to just go through a really, really quick exercise of just thinking about some of those things, thinking about your community. I'm sure a lot of you drive through your community and think about some of those things from time to time. But if we could just take a second, think about you are king or queen for a day. Money is not an option. You wake up in the morning, and I don't know where you wake up. Maybe you wake up in your house and you have a lot of property, and you look outside and there's some wild turkeys running across your land. Maybe you wake up in a neighborhood and you look across the street and you see your neighbor outside getting into their car for the day. Maybe you wake up and you're in a townhome and you have, a little bit of land, a little bit of grass before the sidewalk, and you're going out to walk your dog, and you don't have to mow your land because they've got, somebody that takes care of that for you in your townhome. But what does that day look like? Do you see friends? Are you just enjoying your home? Are you making, a nice steak dinner? Are you going out to a bar with friends to go watch some March Madness? Think about all those things in your ideal day. And maybe those things are in your community right now, and maybe they're not. Maybe those are the things that you're missing out on. And just there's not a right or wrong answer, but think about those things that you may be missing, or those things that you love about your day and your ideal day, and understand that TIF can be a tool that you can use to achieve some of those things. So I think that's what we have for the formal presentation, and we're going to open it up to questions here.
What do you want me to touch on this, Alex?
Yeah.
So why do we take questions? We do have a QR code here. I mentioned that I work with communities on a daily basis, help them do development projects, but the other side of the work that I do at TIF Strategies is around strategic planning and data and how we use data to inform the decision-making process. So something that we've rolled out this year is what we're calling the community needs assessment, and it should take 5 minutes. So if you're interested in participating, just feel free to scan that QR code with your phone, and while we're answering questions, you can fill it out. But we're doing it across the state of Indiana and Michigan to better understand what are some of the challenges that most communities are facing. So is it quality of life? Is it housing? Is it having the appropriate types of development and land uses? Trails, connectivity, sidewalks, just really understanding where you feel your community is at, rating that, and then that helps us understand the challenges that communities across the state are facing, and allows us to help them better. So it's kind of interesting, it gives you a score at the end in terms of where your community ranks on some of these metrics. So it kind of gives you some immediate feedback and data that I think is pretty cool. So feel free to scan that and fill that out while we take questions.
My name's Brett Dennerline. You seem like a nice gentleman. I appreciate the information. I have a comment first. So, a TIF requires that the area be called an economic development area. And if you're in an economic development area, then eminent domain standards actually lower. Because if you have a private property, you cannot take your property unless there's a public purpose. So why isn't there in your presentation a reference to that? Is my first question.
Because not every project requires the use of eminent domain.
No, but it lowers the standard. Because I've got property in the TIF, and under Kelo versus City of New London, which is a Supreme Court case, you know that case, right?
I do.
Explain it.
Pop me off top. Please. So, basically, it was a Supreme Court case that argued that developers were trying to take property that was already in good use and reutilize it for economic development purposes. It's the high end of it. I think we get the...
Yeah, it's correct, isn't it, that once you're designated an economic development area, eminent domain is in play. Isn't that correct?
Eminent domain, well...
It's in Indiana Code, let's see here, Title 36, Article 7, talks about development areas and the process of eminent domain. If you've got private property, that doesn't apply if you're outside the economic development area. Isn't that correct?
Well, let's step back from the whole statute, because I can't quote the statute, being not an attorney, everything else. What I can tell you is that eminent domain is a policy choice that is made...
Right, but the question is, isn't it correct that if you're in a TIF, it's easier to apply eminent domain? Because if you're private property, you don't. Well, I'll tell you that it's true.
Well,
Because I am an attorney, and I know what the law is. I have property in a TIF, and you're subject to eminent domain once you're in the TIF.
but you can be subject to eminent domain outside of it.
No, you can't unless it's something like a public utility or a road.
Correct.
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 Okay.
And
So you got to tell these folks here something to correct what we said earlier, which is that when you're in a TIF, you're more likely to be subject to eminent domain.
we don't find that to be true.
Because that's wrong.
You're false.
That's wrong. And the other thing is, it's like watching a horror show here. I mean, you cite Carmel as a success. I mean, Carmel 15 years ago was a nice Indiana town with blue-collar workers. And now it's a place where you can't recognize it. My brother lives there. You can't walk down the street without hearing Hindi or Mandarin. I mean, it's crazy.
So, sir.
What's the purpose of development? That's my question to you.
Okay.
That's
So
my
let's-
question. That's my second question, which is, why do we want data centers? Why do we want this development? What's the purpose of it?
Okay, so, again, the presentation is not about eminent domain. Eminent domain can be used for a number of things, and I agree with you, sir. Once you're in it, you can use eminent domain. But it changes the standard of how typical eminent domain is utilized versus what you have to pay if you're using it in an economic development area. What I will ultimately say is this, and I go back to my initial statement. Eminent domain is a policy decision that is made by your elected officials. I'm not advocating for or against eminent domain. Eminent domain was used for I-69 to finish I-69 from Evansville to Indianapolis, not an economic development area. There are other projects where there are eminent domain is used because you are doing the project. So eminent domain is completely different than utilizing TIF.
That's
Yes.
false. That is absolutely false.
No.
That is a false statement because when you're in a TIF,
Okay,
eminent
sir.
domain can apply, whereas if you're outside of the TIF, it cannot apply.
But you can use it for public purposes either time.
Yeah, if you're putting through a utility or a road, but if you cannot use a eminent domain to take private property for private development, which is what a TIF is for, it's for private development. Once you're in a TIF, you're in an economic development zone, and under the Supreme Court precedent, which is Kelo versus New London, City of New London, that you're aware of, the standard for eminent domain goes way down, and you can lose your property.
In the state of Indiana, it actually goes up.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
It does not, because if I have private property outside of a TIF, eminent
I want to
domain
finish your
cannot
second
apply.
question, sir.
You
can
cannot
sit
apply
and
for
argue
private
about eminent
development.
domain, but I'm not an attorney, I'm not going to stand up
Well,
here.
then don't say things that are wrong.
What?
Right.
Okay.
Don't say things
So-
that are wrong.
So let's go back to your second question,
You're
sir.
representing to these
Sir.
folks something that's not correct.
That the statutes
It's
are what
plain
they
and
are,
simple.
and there are attorneys that are paid to deal with
Well,
it.
then let
We
them
are not
talk, because
advocating.
what you're saying is not correct.
Sir, my next response is why do we want development? You asked about
Okay,
why
answer that
development is
question.
there.
Why do we want data centers from Microsoft? Why do we want data centers from Google? Why do we want international migration populating towns like Carmel, where 15 years ago they were blue-collar, mixed, and upper-class people that were from Indiana, and now I go there, my brother lives here, you cannot walk down the street without running into someone that speaks a language you don't understand. Why is that good for Indiana?
That is a policy decision that's made by each individual.
TIFs cause
Community.
that.
Each community makes their own decision on what type of projects they're going to go after, and that's the application that I talked about, that we talked about, is these are policy decisions that your elected officials have to make. I'm not advocating that you do one project or the other. You asked what are some of the benefits we talked about. We talked about increased assessed value, which helps lower the amount of taxes that everybody's going to pay over the long run. We talked about the possibility of bringing in additional students if you set up a housing tip. Whether you're bringing in a population that doesn't speak a native language here, that speaks it somewhere else, that is a decision, that's a policy decision that's made. I think the other comment that I would ultimately make, and Jack said it, is a number of times development is going to happen whether you like it or not. You, as a community, you all sit outside of Cincinnati, communities around Indianapolis are going to have development just because there are a number of different things. Airports bringing you in. You've had job recruitment. So as policymakers have made those decisions to do economic development, to increase the number of jobs so that they can continue to provide good wages, to provide more assessed value, to increase the abilities of schools to teach, to bring more students in. Those are decisions that each of those communities have to make.
But the only thing I was going to add to that is just the concept of footloading. If your brother-in-law doesn't like Carmel, he could sell his house. I mean, it's a pretty hot, popular market. So that would be the only other thing I would add to that.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you being here tonight. Can you explain a little bit more of the base AV, and does that adjust for inflation? And then I had a follow-up question to that. If you look at you guys have been doing this a long time, are there counties that maybe TIF too much? Is there like a percentage, a healthy mark that's saying, hey, you can use TIFs, this would be a good situation, make sure you don't go over 5% of the county or 50% of the county or 2% of the county? Not sure if there's any data on that, but those are my two questions. Thank you.
So the base AV does not adjust over time. What happens is it gives you the opportunity to pass through the TIF. So again, that's a policy decision that's made by the redevelopment commission and everybody else. When there's enough money to pay off the bonds, to pay that bond, that's an opportunity to pay that forward, or you see an additional development. Because once you set up an economic development area, you may have additional housing that happens, or you may have other things. So you're actually expanding the assessed value through that project, hoping that it will benefit the entire area. So that's my answer to the first one. The second one really is a function of your financial advisor, helping your community look at those things. We're not financial advisors. I can't sit here and tell you that this community should be at 5% or 10. You should never be at 100% because then you'll never be able to operate your school, or you'll never be able to operate those. But you have to be able to operate those standard operational police, fire, schools, libraries. If you can continue to sustain those and continue to get some additional development, which helps in the long run with those other projects, that's the opportunity that you're going to look forward to. And it's going to depend. What's good in Ohio County will be different from what's good in Dearborn County, will be different from what's good in LaPorte County, Allen County, Hendricks, Hancock, Vanderburgh, etc.
The only thing I was going to say, just to even go outside of can you guys hear me on the mic now?
I don't think it was working when I spoke, but I can hear you just fine anyway.
Cool. I mean, probably the same question could be asked at any time, and when you think about economics in the country, traditionally, historically, major cities set up around rivers. Why? Because it was a resource. It was that helped move goods, right? So at some point, probably somebody would have said, Indianapolis, for example, is a city that's not set up along a major waterway. Somebody would have said, "Are you crazy for setting that up?" So that's just something to think about. In that, I think a lot of the reason why up north so many of those data centers are coming, and probably the same as Dearborn County, is for water, right? You have water. It's the same reason the distillery would want to be around the water. The same reason why a textile mill in the 1900s would have wanted to be in a certain area. So to what Pete was saying, that reason and justification for business wanting to be in an area is going to change based on the features and the physical resources it has. So the reason why a business would want to be in a certain area and the justification for the TIF would be different.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can be loud. I think we can be loud as well.
Sounds fine. Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly about the TIF, after 25 years, if the company's gone, what happens to the TIF? They go bankrupt. Does the community get in there?
That's a good question.
So,
I have two more.
yeah, I can speak about that from here, I think.
So,
So,
these TIFs, how many years have they been operational? Because do these companies, the way companies operate and stuff, hey, it's 25 years, we're going to get off community and stuff.
so that's not true. They'll leave an asset that's there. So typically, somebody still owns the building.
Right.
So it does, yeah. The responsibility transfers, it stays with the property. It doesn't necessarily. So if GM, and I'll pick on GM, right? If GM was in here and they got some kind of TIF benefit, and then GM decided to leave after that 25 years, whatever GM left that building, whoever owns that building, whether it's GM or they sold it to a subsidiary, they're still going to be responsible for the property taxes that are there. And if they sell it in the middle of that TIF, so they're year 17, whoever's there is going to have to pay that. And normally when we put agreements together, something that Jack and I work on is we make sure, maybe we'll use a minimum taxpayer agreement to make make sure that it's codified in our economic development agreement so that they're responsible for that level throughout that entire program.
Okay, so like say Detroit or places.
I can't hear her. Can you give her the mic?
Yes.
If you take a place like, say Detroit where GM moved out, it's a big building. It's not like this.
Yeah, okay. And there's a vacant building, and then what happens? If there's nobody there to pay that money because they're gone.
Somebody still owns the building,
Okay.
and that's who's gonna be responsible for it.
All right.
So the tips do follow, like, you have an apartment complex or something like that, tips follow the other.
Correct.
And also too, if you don't offer tips to developers, will they not come to your community?
That is part of the but-for condition that I talked about.
So it's up to our leaders, our elected leaders, maybe say, tips, because a lot of us don't want, I don't understand why we need development. We've got plenty of, I've seen the turkeys run around.
Yeah, the only thing I was gonna say, it's the same, it'd be the same thing as in a residential house, so if you're trying to sell your house and buy a new house, until your house sells, you're still responsible for the taxes on that house.
Well, here's my thing with TIF, is I know people want development, some people do, but, I wouldn't want to build a house, I would expect the community to give me money to get me there, and that's kind of like,
Amen.
it's a matter of precedent.
Any more questions? These are good questions, good comments.
I got a question. I don't want to scream. So I've been following the property tax debate in Ohio. The property tax in Ohio quite closely. I'm curious on these programs. Just you guys do this all over the country? I take it. Is that
Primarily here in the Midwest, so we
okay?
don't-
So you have stuff in Ohio. You do this in Ohio.
have not dealt with, specifically with.
In the event, the abolishing property taxes in Ohio could possibly be on the ballot in November. All these tips that are in Ohio, what happens to that if they did? I mean, does anybody have any idea what would happen?
My guess is they'll still have some mechanism to pay it. I mean, you'll have to, because those were all guaranteed by the government. Anytime that you put a bond out, you're gonna have to guarantee it with, so they may use property tax, if that's what they're gonna replace it with. But specifically what's gonna happen in Ohio, I couldn't tell you.
And one more question then on that note. So I know you guys are really nice guys, and just a chance you're not doing this for free. Overall, you're not doing this for free. So does your company sell bonds?
No.
You're just a consulting on how to get this done, and you get paid for it. Okay. So that was one of my questions. So.
Yeah, we are not financial advisors, we're not attorneys, we come in and we help communities with long-term strategic thinking and implementation of those plans. May help with economic development agreements to make sure that things are done openly and transparent so that the community understands what's happening.
So a consulting firm is basically.
Correct.
They also may have sunsets on that good tip, because instead of taking it away in one foul swoop, they may say the last tip is gonna expire in 2040, and after that, there's no obligations to pay that. So as they phase out,
They just drop them off.
They
and
may
they
drop
don't
them
renew
off.
anything after
Yeah.
that.
I think there was some.
Are you, that was a big facility, you got full.
Testing. All right, back to you, miss.
I just want to first of all thank Commissioner Bischoff for putting this on. I'd like to say, I expect this level of community involvement and transparency, and you show that. So thank you. You guys all seem great. I'm getting a little bit of a bad cop, good cop feel though. To answer the GM Anderson question, as someone who spent multiple weekends for over a decade in Anderson, if anyone's been to Anderson and driven around Anderson, that's what happens when those big industries leave. It's a ghost town, it's very low income. So a lot of the examples I saw tonight were all centered around data centers, and we're talking about housing, but I don't feel like we're talking about townhomes here. I feel like we're talking about low income housing. That's what I feel like the TIF district is gonna bring. And to your credit, you had mentioned that a lot of these wages are low at a lot of these data centers. And they may be training robots in Plainfield, but I don't know that we want to train our kids to run robots here in Dearborn County.
Yeah, but that's a redevelopment board question,
Exactly.
not a
We
TIF
have
question.
We have a lot of them in this room, so I want them to take note of this. Another issue with somewhere like Carmel, Indiana, is there is a nuclear power company that moved from Washington State to Carmel, Indiana. So you're also getting that. They're there now. As far as that goes, I like seeing turkeys. I like seeing my neighbors' big fields. I like seeing their trees. And we're fighting some battles here in this county. I don't know, you gentlemen might be from Indianapolis, you might be from Chicago, I don't know. But I'm sure you're aware that we've been fighting our asses off for about 4 or 5 years now. And we've got some people in this room running that I want to start hearing say things more publicly. I don't think we need necessary development. I think there's ways to generate revenue without bringing third parties into this county. And speaking of the $15 million that they're getting in LaPorte, right? LaPorte, when you look at the expenditures from last year in Dearborn County, they spent $17 million in electrical infrastructure. That was in the paper last week. I advise everybody to look at the last 6 lines of all the millions and millions of dollars spent on sewage, water, and electrical. And I can't get an answer from any of our officials where that money came from and what are we expecting in Dearborn County to be spending those kind of numbers. But we're hearing it's all going to go back to the school. I went to this school. This is a very expensive building to maintain. Do we need any more money in these schools for football jerseys? Is that the incentive we get as a tax break? And my question is, can you explain the dangers of a TIF? Can you explain any loopholes that our development officials could extend to, say, Maxwell, or any of these big-name third parties that we always see all over our county? What are the dangers for the citizens who are concerned that, number one, we don't want data centers, we don't want solar fields, and we don't necessarily want nuclear smart parks in Dearborn County? Thank you.
Jackie, good question. There's a lot there to unpack, and I'll try to do my best. So I think the first thing that I heard was on the low-income housing piece, which that is something we hear across the state, right? People think apartments and they think, oh my gosh, low-income housing. We, with the communities we work with, really never advocate for low-income housing. Usually what we're seeing TIF use for is for your Class A market rate in more rural places, because the rents that they need to finance those buildings don't necessarily make sense in a Dearborn County like they would in Indianapolis. So that gap that we talked about, TIF is a way to fill that so you can get the Class A market rate apartment. I would not recommend using it for low-income housing, especially if that doesn't fit with your vision for the community.
I would add that data centers don't fit.
Yeah, and then I would say we shouldn't use TIF for data centers if that's the general public sentiment. I wouldn't recommend using TIF for projects that aren't supported by the public and that you don't feel are going to benefit your community. I think that was kind of what I tried to hit at my section of it, right? I think it all comes back down to planning and aligning with the plans that you laid out and the vision that you have for your community. So if you don't want to grow, and your elected officials are on board, and you know the majority of the community is on board with that, that's up to you, and that's a policy decision that can be made, and you're not going to use it to support growth, and that's understandable. Some communities want that. I think the place to advocate for growth, when we look at the population of counties in the state of Indiana, I think all but 10 counties in this state are growing. And if you're not growing, you're dying, and that is a threat. When we talk about how you raise revenue in this state, property tax is the #1 way to fund local government. And so if you're losing houses, you're losing residents, you're ultimately losing funds.
So we're getting your taxes in this county, don't worry.
Yeah, so that's maybe another piece of growth, right? If you grow, it reduces it spreads out the assessed value, right, that we're capped at. So it also can help you reduce the taxes that you have to pay. Those are the merits, right? And I also think growth needs to happen responsibly. I tried to touch on that a second ago. I don't think we should be building apartment complexes in the middle of nowhere on farms. I think those should be clustered in 40 denser urban areas, right? So that's your cities and towns that already exist. I think that's an important piece of it too. We don't advocate for uncontrolled growth when we work with our clients. We like to use the term smart growth, because you don't want to stretch the resources too thin, whether that's on the utility side or the financial side, to where it's not sustainable for you to function as a government entity. And maybe that's one of the risks of TIF, right? Like if you're stretching yourself too thin, whether it's on infrastructure or not being able to capture enough funds to pay for the services that you need to provide as a county government, then you may have overstretched. And I don't think that's happening here because you do have a responsible government. And I think that's something that needs to be weighed and balanced, right? This is stuff that goes to pay for the ideal projects in the world where we come from. It shouldn't be used to pay for jobs that are going to have low wages. The data center thing, there are pros and cons to it. I understand where you're coming from. I think the biggest con that I see is there's not a lot of jobs tied to data centers. The reason we included it in the presentation was because we felt there can be some merits if you structure the deal appropriately. But that might not be the best fit for your market.
It's more the environmental.
Yeah.
4.5 miles that are affected, radius around that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair, and that's the position of the county. It shouldn't be something that TIF is going to.
Now, will you all be advising our planning and zoning, or?
No, so I guess the other comment came up. Commissioner Bischoff asked us to be here. We're doing this free of charge because we like to go and educate communities on economic development, growth, and TIF, because it's something that we're passionate about. But we're not employed by the county at all. We just enjoy doing this. Sometimes we get beat up a little bit, but I think this is a good conversation to have, and I applaud you for having it, right? Because this is the time we're in, right? The data centers make sense, the solar makes sense. What type of housing do we want for our community? What do we want to preserve? How do we get there? I think that is a great thing that's happening here, and we just are happy to be a part of it. No matter what direction you're going.
Real quick, we've got another question over here. And also, if you all would like, if you have a question that doesn't get answered at the end, we're more than happy to collect your information, your email, and we can get you some answers. So see either Commissioner Bischoff or Pete or Jack or myself, and we can get your information and continue to have dialogue with you all.
Hi, my name is Lisa Barker. I'm a realtor, so I am passionate about people being able to own their own homes. Recently, I've done taken some surveys on what the community wants to see, et cetera, for the county planning and zoning. And what I've noticed in doing those surveys is that a lot of projects came into cities with private money, and then housing was developed around those private projects. We have quite a few in our area, like the Seagram and Shenley plants, Lunsburg and Anchor Glass, and then Aurora had a little Cochran Chair Company and the Aurora Casket Company, and a lot of housing developed around those projects. Those projects, when the industry left, the housing went down. Aurora right now is 36% rental occupied housing. Can TIF money be used to reinvigorate those areas, possibly buy them out, put them in better housing, and reinvigorate that area so that we don't have to occupy brand new land? I should call it virgin land, not use those areas, but use some of the areas that we really like to see improved.
Yeah, really good question. I'll start and then hand it over to Pete because Pete has a good real world example of doing just that. But the intent is really for what you're talking about, right? When you designate a redevelopment area, it's supposed to be a blighted and distressed part of your community. And then you funnel the TIF dollars to those areas to address the blight and the distress. So that is really the intent. It goes back to the but-for test that Pete talked about. And I think that is a really great way to use TIF dollars, right? And it's looking at community impact that's more grassroots compared to something like a data center that's going to have this disproportionate footprint, right? You're making a real difference in your community, rebuilding it, creating attractive places for people to live, helping retain the residents, reducing brain drain, right? I think all that is important, getting young families to come to your community. So I would say, yes, that is a great use for it. You want to talk about what you did in Yorktown?
Yeah, so real quick, excuse me. In Yorktown, we were falling into that same situation right in our downtown. We had properties that were dilapidating, becoming rental, people that just didn't care, parking the wrong way, cars that were up on blocks, all the things that you think of in an area that is just not in good shape. And so what we were starting to see is our assessed value, and I keep coming back to that assessed value, especially in that area, it was starting to lower instead of rising. So again, the cost of police officers goes up every year, the cost of insurance goes up every year, if you want to retain good talent and things like that. So what we did is we made the decision that we were going to end up buying about 6 blocks. We bought 6 blocks in our downtown, actually build a new town hall, build a new park, and now we negotiated with one mixed-use building that put in 27 new homes or apartments. Jack is currently working with my successor, the new town manager there. They're talking about another 85 homes and another mixed-use building that's going to go there that we utilize ready funds. But we went in, we after buying those 6 blocks, we actually tore up the streets, put in new infrastructure because a lot of that infrastructure was put in 1937. So the best day of sewer pipe is the day you put it in the ground. It starts to deteriorate, it starts to crack, it starts to crumble, fall in. So we had to make improvements, and by improving that, so when I talked about that $6 million building that now you couldn't build for more than 18, that was part of that project. What we saw was we're now going to see an investment in that particular area of a little over probably $60 million, especially once this next project goes. In addition to that, the town used TIF dollars to do some facade grant money because this was in our downtown. So we have local businesses that maybe needed to clean up the outside of their businesses, put some roofs on. So there are different ways. There's other things that you can utilize those dollars for. We created a startup business loan that came out of there. We now have a bakery that just opened this last year. We did some data analysis way back in 2017. Veritas did it for us. We found that we were losing about $7 million a year in sales for people going out of town for things like bakeries and other grocery meat markets, etc. This bakery just opened this last month, about 3 weeks ago. The owner of it, this is her second business on Main Street, second one that was utilized. Those facade grants, she's put about $600,000 into that building, and you can tell I now eat cinnamon rolls on a daily basis at that location because they're so good. But that's keeping people spending money in our community. It's keeping those tax dollars in there. So utilizing TIF for a redevelopment project is one of the best things that you can do in our town.
All right, we've got another question over here. Thank you, Pete. Oh, we got a quick comment over here, and then
Gentleman up here had a question, so I just want to make sure we didn't miss it.
yeah. Can we do a really quick statement? He said it was going to be quick, so quick statement, and then we'll run over for another question.
Thank you. I want to apologize for losing my temper because when I hear something that is so incorrect, it just got me. So, and I didn't realize Commissioner Bischoff is sponsoring this, so I want to say thank you. And my comment is this, I'm teeing off what Ms. Barker said. If you do end up consulting with the county, with the commissioners and the redevelopment, I would sharpen your pencils because I think the areas that TIFs could work, I'm not against TIFs totally. What I'm against is what's commented on the room is greenfields and development sprawl that happens with TIFs. Because we have a lot of TIFs in this county. But we don't have TIFs where I could see they work. I lived in Chicago for a number of years, almost 30 years. TIFs work there because there's library areas, they're used and streets that you fixed up. So what, do you have an example of using a TIF in a town to revitalize the town in a way that it's better? And on the flip side of that, we need low-income housing. I own a mobile home park. That's necessary because people need to live in low-income housing. So you don't want to kick out the residents that do live there, at least not, you want to keep a percentage of them there. So if you could address that, Tom, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And again, thank you for showing up. I do appreciate it.
Pete, can I just go real quick, because you mentioned, I just really quick wanted to piggyback off that. That's not something that gets talked about, even in a lot of what we're doing in a lot of today. But entrepreneurship and supporting small businesses, incubating them and helping them grow, helping somebody take their idea and having that set up, that solid grant program or something set up, your internal computing system is incredibly important and really the backbone of our economy in the U.S. We have a lot of big corporations that make a lot of money, but we have a lot of little businesses that employ 13 or less people, and those are really the ones that are making that community impact. Those are the employees that are spending money in their community, and so that's a great example of that. And to just some of those other questions that are being asked, I think it's important to highlight those.
Yeah, well, you walk over. I'm going to use Yorktown as the example. I was the town manager there. As I just mentioned, we bought 6 blocks of housing that was dilapidated. It was about 28 structures. Different homes that had turned into rentals, again, had cars sitting on blocks, a number of different things. We ended up buying those 6 blocks, we put in a public park, we put in new public infrastructure and everything else, and we got a mixed-use building that has 5 retail spots on the bottom, including a new restaurant, which was desperately needed. We had 1 dinner choice, in my opinion, maybe 2. We now have one that has opened. We have a microbrew in town. We don't have whiskeys here, so up there we've got whiskeys here. Well, down in the middle of here, by the way. But in that essence, it was utilized so that the town spent about $12 million in infrastructure money, putting in town hall, the park, etc. And now, as I just mentioned, we're going to have about $60 million worth of investment. And then you start to go laterally. For me, it's laterally east and west there. We've also improved a number of buildings that were existing by doing those facade grants, business startup loans to try and reinvigorate that downtown area. So that's one success story. Noblesville did a very similar thing for a larger community standpoint. They went in, they had an area downtown where they ended up buying 3 blocks, put the Levinson in, put in additional parking, which actually helps during the day as part of that. And then when the daily parkers move out, the people that live in the Levinson, I think it's 38 units, come in and they have structured parking, they have additional restaurants in their downtown opportunities. Again, and I agree with you, we're not, again, policy decisions are decisions of the local elected officials, and we try and help steer those in the right way. We don't necessarily advocate for additional greenfield. In fact, I think if you talk to us, you'll find that we don't appreciate the sprawl. From a town manager standpoint, it is easier to staff people in a condensed area and a denser area than it is to keep growing in and outside of everything. So does that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hey, Pete, when you say we bought 6 things, is that the town?
Commission bought it.
Okay, and then they sell them to private investors when it's done, or how's that work?
So we and I got stuff using we are no longer there. The redevelopment commission owns them. We ended up negotiating with the developer to put in that mixed-use building. Actually, we sold that property to them as part of the development. That also, when we sold that property, that was part of the gap that needed the loan. So in addition to
So the tax base made up the extra $2 million to make the deal work.
Correct.
So you improved it, got it off your plate, and the taxes are paying the differential to make the deal work.
Yeah, and we utilized a tool in there called minimum taxpayer agreement. So maybe the first year it wasn't going to pay the the full amount of what the bond was responsible for. We negotiated with the developer and made sure that the developer is going to pay the amount that takes off the bond. So I think to your question is what happens when somebody goes away? That developer that originally built that 7 years ago, he no longer is there. He sold it. We had a requirement in our economic development agreement that he owned it for 5 years, that he pay all the taxes that pays bonds and everything down. After 5 years, it was profitable enough that he wanted to sell it and move on to another community. So he was able to do that. Now we have another owner who's receiving the rents, able to pay the property taxes, and is receiving enough money to make some type of income. Yeah.
Thank you.
I would say the other thing we didn't touch on, but we started to get to it, when we work with clients, we don't advise them as a community to take on the bonds and be responsible for the payment. We recommend that all of our clients do developer-backed bonds, where the developer actually owns the bond, the increment goes to him, and then they pay off the debt, right? Because then if the deal goes bad, it's their responsibility, it's not the community's. It would be, when we talk about what is irresponsible practices around TIF, I would say a community-backed bond, that's the irresponsible practice, because then if the business or the developer leaves town, you're stuck paying for it, and we would never recommend that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming. One thing I do appreciate, I'm running for state senator in our district, and most of our people that I've talked to, actually everyone I talk to, unless they have strings tied to a developer, they do not want development in our area. Apparently Governor Halcomb wanted this to be the next development area. So people are asking me to help stop the development or make it more smart development, keeping it in your local, like where the towns already are, rather than go use virgin ground, as you may say, or farm ground, which is much easier for the developers to use. So one of the questions I had, when you said you were using the number earlier, $6,000 a kid, when you bring in so many kids, where's the $6,000 come from?
I can do that. I can answer that. Okay. So the statistic is the mechanism is ADM, or average annual membership. It comes from the state and is given back to, because we're a school choice state, so that's what they do. So what they do is they understand the enrollment per student. I'm guessing they do it on a semester basis because it's the beginning, first day of school. And so what they're able to do is based on enrollment at the first day of school, the school gets that money and it is used for operations, teacher salaries. It obviously limits then the amount of operational bonds you may have to acquire. So the more students you have, the more money that the school's going to get. And there's a lot of stuff in the news about it right now with micro schools and things like that, and how they're taking money away from some of the larger schools.
And it's property tax based, or not property tax, that's income tax based. So all of our income tax goes to the state, and then it's divided through a number of different, it funds jails, it funds everything else.
Right.
So one of the things that they do is they pay the school system based on count day, which is what Alex was referring to. There's one count day, normally it's early in September, where every student is assigned to a school, and that's the number that then is given for that AGM.
So the $6,000 comes from the state, that's from our taxes, but then our property tax pays for the schools and stuff. However, when you do a TIF, say we have an area of 100 or 200 acres, and we build 500 houses in there, if you create a TIF there, that money does not go towards the schools, it goes towards the TIFs to pay back the bonds. However, my knowledge is kids come from houses. So there's a lot of kids there. So that would actually create a whole nother class for a school. So for 25 years, people are going to have kids. They're going to go through the whole system. And the school would not get any money for another couple hundred houses. So to me, if you create a TIF, that all falls on everyone else that's not in a TIF, which will raise everyone's taxes. And every community I've looked at that does a lot of development, their tax rate goes up. Hamilton County is ridiculous, their taxes. Carmel, their taxes are really high. People like you come in and say, oh, we're going to keep your property tax low. It always goes way up. The more development, the more it goes up, rather than keeping it rural. Our area likes rural, except for the concentrated area that people came from the city out. The rest of it is a really rural area. And that's how they want to keep it. So it looks like mostly to me the TIF is for the developers. There's so many ways that it doesn't make sense. So the TIF wants to help the developers do the gap. I'm a farmer. If you have a big gap, you just can't do it because it doesn't make sense. It's not managing money properly. Most counties do not have a money problem, they have spending problems. So you have to do without if you don't have enough money. That's kind of the problem with the United States right now. So, I guess that's all the questions.
A lot in there that I'm not necessarily going to agree or disagree with. I understand, I think, your comments. I think I will say this, what we're finding across the state when we do demographic studies and when we look at demographic studies that schools are having done for them is that we're seeing population declines in the schools. And so when you've got a building to take care of or you've got teachers to pay, you have a couple of choices, and you're absolutely correct. You can decide we don't want that many kids, and we don't want to have that many teachers, and then we lose that. What has basically happened in the state of Indiana, and although last year I think was the first year that we saw a little bit of a reverse trend in this, is we've seen the brain drain leaving the state of Indiana, and specifically leaving rural communities. People are moving to, whether it's the Indianapolis or the 9 metros around there. We see the influx of numbers there. Maybe around here, outside of Cincinnati, you're getting some of the same thing. I haven't studied those specifically, but what we do see is that schools are losing those. And so schools are making a decision to chase the students so that they can continue to offer the classes and everything else. And that's why new development is often requesting that, because when you bring new houses in, the second, and I touched on it just lightly, is that we're finding more people my age and above have decided to age in place, which there is absolutely nothing wrong with. In fact, we actually encourage it. We want them to live in their communities, but when we aren't seeing that natural matriculation of houses changing, then we don't see new students coming into those houses that are existing, and that's pushing some of the demand for new homes. But I agree with you. There's 2 choices when you start to lose revenue. One is to try and find more revenue, and the other one is to cut expenses. And those are, again, policy decisions.
I think the trend is, I could be wrong, but I think I'm right, that people are having less kids than they ever did before, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So if you have less kids, you're going to have less kids go to school. If the population's, they say it's staying the same or almost declining. So if the population's declining, why are we having a housing shortage if no one else is coming in? You can try to force people to come in, but then you're taking people away from other places. So you're just going to cause another shortage in another town. So you're basically forcing overdevelopment and stealing students from another town. Because now each school is competing for kids. So they're building these outrageous sports complexes, which is putting more tax burden on our people. They're competing for kids. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. There's only so many people in this room, so we could all be over there, or we could all be over there. Or we could be in the middle. But if we're not creating any more people in this room, we only got so many, but everybody's competing, rather than just be happy with what you have.
Yeah, good question, and I think there's definitely some merit to that. I think it again goes back to these points, policy decision of what you want to be. I will say this historically, and right now where we're at in this country, we are underbuilt on houses. They're calling it the housing crisis. It's not something that's unique to Indiana. It's an nationwide problem stemming from us being underbuilt. A lot of that is due to the Great Recession and the builders and developers that left the market, that went belly up. There has been a lack of new housing development across the state, across the nation. You're right. I think you're very accurate when you say we're competing for people and talent. You can either live here or you can live there. I hate to use Carmel as the example because it is often viewed as the big boogeyman in the room, but they're the complete opposite spectrum. And they chose to grow because they wanted more people, right? If you don't want to grow and you want to keep things the way they are, that's totally fine within your prerogative. There's nothing wrong with that. There are consequences to both outcomes, right? And we talked about the revenue piece. I think we see it a lot, and I like to say this, people hate two things. They hate change in the way things are. There's probably things right now in the county that you wish were different. And a lot of that goes back to funding and how do we pay for those things to make those changes. And if you're not growing, it's going to be really tough to address that. So if you feel like growth is a threat, then don't pursue it. If you feel like decline is a threat, then I would recommend you pursue growth. But again, I think that goes back to creating your vision, looking at your leadership and electing people that share the same vision that you do for the future of your county. But I would say, from a professional opinion, and somebody who looks at demographics and studies economics in the state, one of the biggest threats that we face as a state is population decline. And people leaving Indiana and going to Illinois, going to your other big metro areas, creates brain drain, we're losing talent. Those are huge threats because people want to go to places that are great to live in. So if we're letting things fall apart, fall into disrepair because we can't pay for them, we're not having new houses, somebody's going to go somewhere else where they're offered those things. And ultimately, I think that's a net negative and not a net positive.
But in addition to people going to places where there's great houses, they go to places where there's jobs. So back to Lisa Barker's comment about there were a casket company employed 75 to 150 people. It closed. Nothing has replaced it. Another business bought it out that employs one person. So how do you get industry attracted to your area so that people have jobs to come to and a reason to move to your area?
Yeah, well, Mike, I hate to put you on the spot, but I think you might back me up on this. What we're seeing in economic development is that jobs are following people, and not that people are following jobs anymore. So businesses are actually going to where the talent pool already exists, right? They're leaving places like Dearborn County that are declining because there are more pools of talent in other places where they have those training things. And Pete mentioned what you're seeing in Hancock County. They're doing that because they want to create that talent to attract those businesses. So you're not just competing for people, you are competing for those jobs, and those jobs are going to places where people are prosperous, right? Everybody's fighting for that worker. We'll see in communities where it's so competitive for talent that an industry will raise hourly wages by cents, and everybody will go across the street to go work at that company, right? So you have to have the people for the company to go locate there, and I would guess if you ask Mike, when he's filling out applications for site selectors to get jobs into the community, the number one thing that we're looking at is what does the talent pool look like? So it's kind of like chicken or the egg, what comes first? I think it all is kind of cyclical in lines. You need to have good quality of place, to have people, and then when you have those people, jobs will come. If you have good jobs, you'll attract more people. And again, I think it goes back to what you want, right? And where does that stuff go? And there's always a balance and there are trade-offs to everything. And again, I think that's up to the community to decide what that vision is for your future. But there are ways to support development if that's the direction you want to go. And that was our hope today, is we could just shed some light on what are some of the positives, and that's not to say there aren't negatives as well.
Did we get all the questions?
gentlemen. So I appreciate what they've done. I wanted to do this to kind of create conversation, to get people to talk, ask questions. And like you said, it's the people's choice of what we want. We just gotta work towards what we want. I learned a few things tonight that I didn't know. I've sat in on 2 or 3 of these type sessions, and every one I sit in, I learned something new. So I'm taking away that tonight and putting that in my knowledge base of when things come in front of me as a commissioner, I have that, to put back out that, hey, maybe we can do this, or maybe we should do this. So, thank you everybody for coming out. Thank you, Sam, for recording tonight. We're gonna have this available, so if anybody missed it tonight and they wanna go watch it, they can go listen to it. Like I said, these guys didn't come here to sell anything, they volunteered. They're on their own, so I appreciate everything they did, and thank you all for coming down.